Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 706 podcast. We are currently not on strike. We are not union members. So I guess we are scabs in that sense. We are still creating content based on the land of cinema, Hollywood. But we will be here to entertain you as you patiently await the next season of 1897 or whatever other show you're waiting on because of the strike. So, welcome. I'm here with my three co-hosts, who are Connor, Anthony, and Tony. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves in that order?
Sorry, I did not press the button. My name is Connor. Barbenheimer. That sounds like a Nazi war criminal.
Okay, well, we've name recognition is a growth edge for us. But anyways, who did I say next? I think I said Anthony.
Anthony.
All right. Thank you, Anthony, for saying your name. And Tony, please state your name and your date of birth and your social security number.
Tony, September 1st, 2002. Social security number is just all ones. I got the best one.
And we're looking forward to being able to drink with Tony next, or actually in like 32 days. So, you excited, buddy? The big 2-1?
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. I was told alcohol tastes like chocolate, which is the only food I eat. So should be good. Looking forward to it.
There you are. All right. We have a wide range of ages here and hopefully a diverse array of opinions as we discuss the movie Sicario. First, a little backstory on our little podcast here. We choose a movie every episode to discuss and tucked into our canon of the 706 greatest films of all time. This week, as mentioned, we are discussing 2015 Sicario, which is an action film directed by, is it Denis or Dennis? I'm horrible with pronunciation. Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve. No, Denis Villeneuve. And written by Taylor Sheridan, whom you might know from such things as Wind River, Hell or High Water. He did some other stuff. I want to say, he's written Yellowstone. He created it, I believe. So pretty well-known tandem there we have for this film. And the movie kind of details, I guess, one arm of the war over drugs and the warring cartels in Mexico and on the border between the Mexico and the U.S., both from the side of the governmental agencies involved, as well as from the perspective of the cartels. We follow, I believe, a kidnap response lead who's played by Emily Blunt for probably the Phoenix branch of the FBI. And she gets kind of lassoed into this interagency task force designed to ostensibly chart a new course in the war. I'm using war for lack of a better term in these series of engagements with the cartels in Mexico. What she doesn't know is that on this task force is Josh Brolin, who is actually a CIA agent, Benicio del Toro, who plays kind of like this rogue assassin. She doesn't really understand what she's getting into and, how essentially the rules of engagement for these types of conflicts are thrown out the window in favor of more direct, ruthless, perhaps no holds barred approaches. So we will get into this film. Let's see. I'd like to hear from you first, Anthony. I believe everybody's seen the film. Is that correct? I want to just make sure everybody's nodding, I believe. Connor, I think you're nodding, right? Yes. Okay. So I want to hear from you, Anthony, just given your positionality as somebody with Mexican heritage. The thing to me that stands out the most about this film is how Mexico is portrayed, how the conflict at the border, surrounding the border, and these kind of towns that connect it, El Paso, Juarez, Phoenix, I guess, as well, how these dynamics are established and how they're fleshed out in this film. I guess, we could save some of the political commentary for later, or you can infuse in your initial comments. Perhaps based on my introduction, that may be something of relative salience to the conversation now, but I don't expect you to necessarily either condemn or absolve the film at this point from any specific angles. So take it wherever you would like. Anthony, go ahead.
Sure, Kirk. Thank you for the gateway points in terms of discussing it. I will say, so many of my thoughts are still kind of scattered. This is one of those times where I finished the film right before we started recording. So some things are still coming through, but I think we talked about it last time when I picked this film. I was kind of interested in it because I remember it being one of Tony's favorites from the year it came out. I remember his love for it. And we were talked about how different it felt from Breaking Bad, which was a show I just finished rewatching, and which, as a show also briefly deals with kind of the cartels of Mexico and whatnot. And I had seen this so long ago, I was really curious about it because I didn't quite remember it or remember what I felt about it. Now coming out of it this time, I think what's kind of fascinating, first of all, is actually, as start with a side note, is you mentioned so much of the work of Taylor Sheridan, who I don't really have an opinion on because I've never really watched a lot of his other stuff, but I'm kind of fascinated by just because of the amount of power and success he's had. You named the movies, but I think overall he has like 6 or 7 TV shows that are all getting second, third, fourth seasons, and they're really popular. And I'm really fascinated by him, and I know more about him than I do some of the work, because I was reading how he fired his writing staff and Terrence Winter from Tulsa King to write the whole show himself, which is a really kind of ballsy move, to fire a guy who worked on The Sopranos and later developed Boardwalk Empire. I just find this kind of level of interest staggering, and I do hope like the work is good. I don't want anything bad. But anyway, I say all that because coming into Sicario, I kind of had high expectations that I was going to rediscover something I missed the first time. And I think it would may be fair to say, and I don't know if anyone else had this reaction, but the first time you watch the movie, you kind of are with Kate, Emily Blunt's character's eyes. You're sort of thrown into a kind of labyrinth of bureaucracy, a labyrinth of, the crime, of location, where they are, what's going on. You're sort of confused. And as you kind of finish it, you kind of look back and realize that Kate is sort of a MacGuffin in a way, an audience surrogate. The real plot of the movie, the real substance, at least to me, happens on the layer below her, and the movie does eventually get into that with Benicio del Toro's character Alejandro, and a handful of others, including the CIA agent played by Josh Brolin. Anyway, getting into the movie itself, there's a lot of things I'm kind of interested in. One of the things I find fascinating is the way the film kind of condemns as you were saying, Kirk, for lack of a better term, the war on drugs, kind of making U.S. soldiers war criminals themselves. The way it kind of instigates a kind of classic, you become the monster by chasing monsters. Interested in that angle, the kind of way it doesn't just absolve the Americana, the American side of things, and the way it kind of brings in a kind of larger scope or hints at a larger scope of Latin American intrigue through the kind of Medellin cartel and the kind of way that the U.S. sort of instigates power vacuums and replaces powerful leaders at the top. And anyway, I could go on and on about that, which I do kind of like. As a movie itself, I still find a handful of things off for me. Just on a kind of level of filmmaking itself, I've realized I'm not someone who gets behind, and I'm going to not be able to say his name again, Villeneuve's filmmaking. I did not quite get into Blade Runner 2049, though I look back on it with some degree of fondness. Arrival, Dune, what's his enemy? And I can't remember his first one, but that one. Is it Incendiaries or something?
Ansandi. He also did
Ansandi.
Prisoners with Hugh Jackman.
Ansandi. Okay, so Prisoners might be the one I like the most. But anyway, in general, I just don't get into his filmmaking, I realize. And it's not just because they're so-called cold. I feel like the style just does not usually work for me. I find a kind of distance, a lack of interest, and kind of at times a boredom even, in a way that kind of just in a movie like Sicario, I shouldn't feel like I have. And similarly, here's a true hot take for me is I feel like Roger Deakins' cinematography is actually at odds with the movie at times. One of the things that really bugs me throughout this movie is I cannot, and maybe this was my TV lighting because I don't remember the first experience, but there are times when like characters, especially Daniel Kaluuya, are just completely obfuscated in shadow. And it really kind of bugs me. And I'm like, could you not light this guy appropriately so I can understand what expressions he's giving? There are times in the kind of tunnel that I would like to have seen some facial recognition in moments. There's whole scenes with Benicio del Toro, who really gives one this outstanding performance that I wanted to see, who for me is one of the most expressive actors alive in a paradoxical way, despite his kind of stern, stoic quality. And so there's a kind of level of filmmaking that also kind of removes the film for me. But more so than that is, I don't even know how to put this, is the film itself, I realize, is not super interesting to me on a deeper level in terms of its depiction of this Mexican border landscape. What it feels like at times to me is like someone read Cormac McCarthy and distilled it in kind of superficial notes. I am much more intrigued, and it may just be a background issue. It may just be the kind of lately my interest in things like Narcos Mexico, which kind of is at fault for over romanticizing this kind of world or over glamorizing it. But I'm much more intrigued by what's happening on the other side of this tunnel and what's happening with these kind of corrupt Mexican policia, this family that he kills, than I am in the whole kind of charade of the CIA, the DEA, and the other kind of American agencies coming together and essentially doing something illegal. And as a kind of movie level in the way it's carried out, something about that I think keeps me at a remove in the same way the style and the filmmaking kept me at a remove. I'll be able to get more coherent as the episode goes on, but I won't take up too much more time. So I think at a basic kind of wrap up is, while the movie has kind of things that excite me and things that intrigue me, I'm still kind of in a place of doubt with it. And maybe I'll be pulled to one side or the other as we go forward.
All right, thank you, Anthony. I think you make fair points, certainly regarding the distance that Villeneuve creates for the audience and kind of cultivates, and how that can feel somewhat tedious at times, I think, for sure, or can add to suspense. It depends on, I guess, your level of engagement with the topic and the film itself and how it's gripping you. So let's head over now to Tony. Tony, would you like to give your thoughts on the film?
Yes. So yeah, no, yeah, as Anthony mentioned, I saw this movie. Actually, this was back when I was like, I wrote reviews for a few websites. So this like 2-year stretch, I'd go to like press screenings and stuff. So in 2015, I saw like 100 movies or something ridiculous. I mean, not all in that year, but like from that year, I've seen like 100 movies for 2015. And this was one of the press screenings I went to. I still remember just sitting in the theater. I remember like the people around me and just the vibe of the room and everything. And like, I remember being so just absolutely transfixed by this movie because I was looking forward to it because I'd seen the trailers and they looked really good. And I saw that Roger Deakins was shooting it. I liked Prisoners and I really liked Enemy. It's funny because we just did Looper, and I feel like this is like a similar point in Denis Villeneuve's career that Rian Johnson was in his career when he came out with Looper. They're both $30 million movies. They're both kind of elevations. They're slightly bigger budget projects. I mean, I guess Prisoners was more of his introduction into the mainstream, but this was definitely kind of an escalation of his career. And he was like a hot young director with like a lot of buzz, a lot of hype behind him. And I think that now he's he's obviously moved beyond this. And I think now he's kind of occupies a similar place to, Nolan maybe 10 years ago. He's operates in a very similar kind of space, different styles to an extent, but he's in a very similar space and does kind of similar kinds of movies in certain ways. But yeah, so I watched this movie with like a lot of hype and anticipation when it came out, and I like really, really liked it. But I haven't watched it since. I haven't revisited it. I haven't felt the need to really. Some movies I don't really feel the need to do that, or sometimes when I have a really strong first experience with a movie, I'm almost like that was enough. Like that was good. That was my experience of the movie. So I was eager to revisit it. I don't think I had quite the same rapturous reaction on this watch. But I still really appreciate it. And I appreciate a lot of the things this movie does. Like, I definitely understand what Anthony's saying, and I understand some of his criticisms, which I think some of which is just subjective. It's just sort of like the vibe and the aesthetic of the movie, and you either glom onto that and you like that or you don't. But this is absolutely a movie that keeps you at a distance in an intentional way, very much by design. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good that it does that, but it is an intentional part of the design of the movie. It does that aesthetically, and it also does that in terms of the writing and the characters. Like, Emily Blunt's character is very much like the audience kind of stand-in. She's our entrance into this world, and her reactions to the things that she's seeing is kind of the reactions that we're supposed to have, or that we're kind of anticipated to have. But her character, we're not given a whole lot to go on as far as her motivation, as far as we're not given a whole lot to empathize with. We find out she's divorced. We hear the name of her ex-husband at one point. She does come across as a little bit too naive, I think, for an FBI agent. Like, there's a scene, I remember people making fun of this scene when the movie came out, and it doesn't play that ridiculously, but given the context of it, it's a little silly when she's basically looking on her laptop at, like, images of cartel violence, and she's like, like, these cartel guys, they really mean business. And it's like, you're in the FBI, like, you don't watch CNN, like, like, it's like, you should be like. Or when she's like, how are we doing this isn't allowed, it's like, dude, you're in the FBI, you've seen way gnarlier shit than this, I guarantee. So that is a little bit, I think that narratively it's necessary to have a character like that playing that role, but there are moments in the movie where I roll my eyes a little bit at that. But what I think is successful about her character, and what I think is actually a very bold choice from a writing perspective, is to have her basically become an irrelevancy by the end of the movie, which is a very kind of unconventional, I think, ballsy sort of choice, where we reach a point in the story after this, this really, visually impressive, tense, like, tunnel sequence, where basically Josh Brolin gives her the lowdown, like, look, we're not actually here to overthrow, we're not here to defeat the cartels. We're here to basically control the cartels. We're here to make sure the people that we like are in charge. And that's the point in the movie where she ceases to have a role. He also tells her, you're basically here for bureaucratic purposes. You're here so you can check a box on a form and say that we did things properly, even though that's basically just a fiction. But I think that's very bold. And I think that when I first saw the movie, especially, and this is why I think the movie plays a little bit better on a first viewing when these things are still surprising. There was something very bracing about that and very kind of shocking about that. And I think that the way it depicts these sort of operations and kind of that turn that it takes, I think is like relatively bold for a mainstream sort of action thriller movie. And I'm sure we'll get into kind of the politics of the movie and how do we feel about how it depicts the cartels, about how it depicts Mexico, about how it depicts law enforcement as we go on, and I'm ambivalent about some of that, but I feel like the United States and the United States federal agencies definitely do not come across looking good or looking heroic in this film. But again, it's a little more complicated than that, which, as I'm sure we'll discuss in a bit. I think aesthetically this movie is a triumph. I understand some of Anthony's criticism. I did not feel like I could. It may have been a TV thing or a connection thing, but I thought I could see Kaluuya's expressions okay. I do like how dark some of the scenes get. Some of the nighttime scenes, I think, are astonishing. The scenes shot at dusk and shot at dawn are incredible. I think you can see exactly what you're supposed to see, but nothing more. It creates this very, immersive feeling. These set pieces, these action set pieces that are kind of the bread and butter of this movie, that are kind of like what you buy your ticket for, are fantastic. I think that the scene early in the film where they're in the traffic jam is just an incredible triumph of like action thriller suspense filmmaking. That I haven't seen that type of scene done as well. To wrap things up, like, oh yes, I love the tension of this movie. I love the dark kind of evil atmosphere of this movie, much like Sorcerer, which we did a while back. This movie has some kind of similar vibes and a similar intensity. This is very much like a Tony movie. It checks a lot of my personal boxes. I do think it loses a little bit of its impact on a subsequent viewing. I don't know that its sort of commentary is as profound or as nuanced as it maybe could be. But in general, I would say I'm very positive still on Sicario.
All right, thank you, Tony. And interesting thing to try to parse out is, if you had seen it for the first time today, would your reaction be maybe wouldn't be as positive as it was the first time in 2015? Obviously, we're exposed to different trends in media and obviously different political ideas, and our perspectives can certainly become altered and distorted, and or perhaps aligned with reality more so than at other times. But Connor, let's hear your take. You did choose this. I nominated it and you chose it. Yeah, let's hear what you have to say. I feel like you could land on kind of the colder side with Anthony, on more of a general appreciation side with Tony, somewhere in between, somewhere off in the distance. Let's hear what you have to say.
You'll just have to see, Kirk. Well, okay, first of all, let me clarify something. When you asked, have I seen the movie, I started nodding. I'm like, well, yeah, I watched it for the episode. I forgot what you meant was that, I didn't realize what you meant was, of course, have I seen it before? Okay, this is my first time watching it. I had said that I had seen it, like, in the gym while, like, exercise equipment was, like, loud and I couldn't really hear it, and I had to watch it with subtitles, and I didn't really. Anyway, so now I recall, actually, because I started the Amazon, like, playing it in Amazon or whatever. I bought it because I always buy the movies for the podcast. Just you never know when I might go back to them. But as it turned out, it was stayed in the same place where I had previously watched it, and it was about halfway through the movie. So I had not seen the whole thing. But what I will say, kind of my primary take, is that it made sense that I stopped, and it was good that I stopped, because to me this movie really has two halves. The first half is what Tony was describing, exactly the thing that makes it great. This kind of this atmosphere, this unadorned, sort of like, as Emily Blunt is described by Daniel Kaluuya, like sweaty, no makeup, her eyebrows look like shit. I don't remember the scene where Daniel Kaluuya really like rails, you really like just
He like
totally
negs her almost.
yeah, yeah. About her eyebrows. I mean, it's very funny scene. Anyway, but no, I think maybe that the state of Emily Blunt's character, right, this kind of haggard, kind of like totally overwhelmed, trying to keep it together, you can't quite, kind of isolated, lonely, suspicious. That character, obviously, that's point of view character, obviously feels perfect. We don't need all her background, because this is not about background or exposition. This is about a feeling of being an observer, and the sense that, like, there's all these things going on that we can't understand, right? From the very beginning, there's just nothing is spelled out for you. We have just this oddity of this room full of, like suited men, and then the one guy who's not wearing a suit, and he seems to be giving the orders. The guy's wearing sandals and he's giving the orders. What is this about? Like, they don't have to spell that out for us. We, along with Emily Blunt's character, can just feel the weirdness of that. And then we have this weird man who's like standing on the other side of the private plane, and then he gets on, and then he says nothing, and it's like this, all these questions arise, and obviously, and I think eventually, right, we have to get the answers to those things. Of course, it's going to be a little bit less satisfying, but once we get past a certain point, I think it becomes like a much more kind of standard, not very grounded kind of action movie, where we have like the guy who tries to seduce Emily Blunt to kill her, but like it just doesn't seem like he was really going to kill. I was very confused. Like, how did she know? Like, do all the cartel members have like the wristband? I'm sorry if I missed something. It was kind of weird to me. And then like it becomes just a very different, much more conventional kind of like almost spy story, where the conspiracy is revealed, and it's kind of a weird conspiracy. This idea that like, okay, the CIA like wants the Medellin cartel to exist. Okay, that's kind of interesting. Like so they want to control it. So they have a guy from the Medellin cartel come with them to like fight the Mexican cartels. But like ultimately it's actually has nothing to do with that, because it's just Benicio del Toro's like revenge quest. And like, how did his wife and child get killed by a Mexican cartel boss? Like, that doesn't like really make sense. So there's all these questions that just to me just did not make any sense. And it just felt like it was all kind of lip service being paid to just the creation of this badass kind of anti-hero figure that basically Benicio del Toro for me becomes in the second half of the movie. He doesn't become an interesting, mysterious man. He becomes this like Jason Bourne, you know, kind of like, obviously he's an anti-hero, he's a bad guy. But to me, he gets very boring very fast. And of course, he's menacing. No, okay, not a Jason Bourne. What he is he's like, and this is again kind of, it connects to like the movie Man on Fire with Denzel Washington. Kind of the idea of being in this exotic locale and the guy just comes in and kicks ass, and he crosses the line into cruelty and into being a nightmare, right? He kind of turns the nightmare back on this nightmarish, you know, foreign exotic location, right? And these scary foreign, you know, like criminals, right? And that's to me is kind of what the role that he fulfills. And to me, it's very unsatisfying. We learned that okay, it's a revenge quest, and like eventually, you know, I think if they wanted to go there, right, they could have had him kill Emily Blunt at the end, just being like, you know what, actually, I don't trust you to not tell the truth about this. Also, because I made you sign a paper. How is that going to stop you from like talking to anyone about this? You know, I think it would have made more sense if if he had killed her. Obviously, that would have been horrible. But there just to be this like just to get beat up and kind of cowed into not like doing this, you know, by the big scary man. You know, it's just kind of like, to me, it's like it wasn't that interesting. It was kind of disappointing. Obviously, I think that the movie has a structural problem of how are we possibly going to be satisfied with the way that this sweaty conspiracy kind of you know, plays itself out and it reveals itself. But anyway, that was substantially my take. I really love the beginning. I did find the ending kind of like actually quite like kind of conventional and quite like uninteresting. But yeah, that's my take.
Wow, did not expect that. Well, fair enough, fair play, Connor. I would have to say I disagree with your assessment of Alejandro, but I can respect where you're coming from with regards to kind of how, yeah, he feels like this very shrouded character, somebody who, you know, is kind of omnipotent to an extent. He's, you know, this ultra uber assassin, and we don't really understand completely what's going on. And, you know, he's kind of used as like a figurehead in this whole thing. And, you know, to me, trying to piece it together, I believe that his character arc is as follows. He was like a public prosecutor in Juarez, where he lived with his wife and daughter. He obviously probably was trying to prosecute cartel. They killed his wife, threw his daughter in a vat of acid. He quit law, it seems, to move to Colombia in search of somebody who could probably get him closer to the people who did this, I guess from the Sonora cartel. And I guess that during his time in Colombia or working on behalf of the Colombians, he became known to all these cartels because he must have been very ruthless in his dealings, because they all call him Medellin. And then he came back. You know, he goes wherever he's sent, as he says. And in this case, he is conscripted in a sense by the CIA for this mission. You know, I think I don't disagree with you, Connor, on some aspects. For me, though, I do find it to be interesting, as opposed to, let's say, that Alejandro was never part of this film, and it was just Josh Brolin going in there, right, and kind of pulling off this breach, I guess, of the cartel's hierarchy and killing off this family. I mean, that would have been interesting. I don't know if it would have had the same impact for me, because ultimately this movie, I think what it tries to emphasize is that, you know, some of these ebbs and flows, these oscillations in these conflicts are determined by grievances, real or imagined. And then people kind of conflate their personal values with national or tribal rhetoric. And that's how they become motivated to act in kind of dogmatic ways, right? So that's what I see in Benicio del Toro's character. I see somebody who's being used by the US government, knows he's being used, but at the same time, I think it's a little wink to like this idea that, that's what we do, right? That's what we do. And that's what our foreign policy is. We try to prey upon and, kind of manipulate the, perceived grievances of one party against another. So to me, that was a little interesting. I know it's not super fleshed out. I know it's like, overshadowed by like the gratuitous violence, but yeah, I don't know. I do think there's something valuable about this film. Like Tony, like you said, I think it's really interesting how toward the end, Emily Blunt's character just kind of fades away, at least in terms of importance. I do remember enjoying, and I still enjoy, the depiction of like the American Southwest. I think there's something interesting about that. To me, there can be a problematic element to it, right? Because it's like, oh, this land looks so alien and so foreign, and some of these shots. And I think that's intentional. As whenever we see or hear about immigration or drug trafficking on the news, we see kind of dusty locales with machine guns or assault rifles, and hear about these horrible, vicious crimes. And so when that creeps into suburbia, right, we often see in this film, we see a couple instances of like the sprawl of Phoenix from overhead. We also see the sprawl of El Paso, and then it quickly shows the border wall or fence right away, and it feels like the conflict or the battlefield is sort of visualized for us. So yeah, I do appreciate how Villeneuve lays out in visual terms this encroachment of something that is unknowable, and I think it's not entirely fair, but I do think it's based on public perception. And so in that sense, it's relevant, and it speaks to who we are as the audience. And it kind of can reflect back to us our fears about Mexico, about this perceived amorality, that we are constantly kind of receiving messaging about. And so I think the film does try to subvert the traditional narrative that's associated with Mexico and criminality. I think it does go overboard at times, like just beyond the point of any sort of kind of playing on the audience's presuppositions. I mean, the scene in Juarez is great and all, but is really dangerous place on earth? I don't know. It's got, I looked it up actually. The homicide rate is 86 per 100,000. Detroit's is 39. I think the highest in the US is like St. Louis at 59. Is Juarez as dangerous? Like, are these things as prevalent? I'm not sure. Maybe it was the case back in 2015. Poor research on my end, but
can I just cut in, Kirk? I mean, we're playing with numbers here, and you're dealing specifically with Ciudad Juarez, but since we're bringing up the larger stereotype of it, let's also figure out that the overall homicide rate and murder rate in Mexico is obviously higher than the U.S. But from what I know, let's just also put out there that Americans visiting Mexico actually have a much lower homicide rate than they do in the U.S., which is kind of like fascinating. And in fact, you're much safer as an American in the Mexico than you are pretty much in most of Texas.
Does that speak to where they're going in Mexico, though?
That is true. And also, though, we have to also figure out is how much of tourism is drug related, which is where most of the criminality and violence in Mexico is.
Right. True.
So like there's a kind of double-edged play here.
It's an interesting side note or piece of evidence to bring forward, Anthony. I was thinking in the El Paso scene, right? Like what happened at that Walmart in El Paso a couple years later, right? So it's interesting, right? And at the end, right, the last scene, the kids playing soccer, they hear some gunfire rattling off in the distance. I guess we're meant to understand that this is just a way of life in Juarez. And I don't know if I really agree with that depiction in general. I mean, I don't think Taylor Sheridan or Denis Villeneuve are trying to incriminate the Mexican people in a broad sense, but I think there are some problematic elements to the film. So let's get into the politics of it and, just how it rings true for you, or it feels, biased, or it feels too kind of rudimentary, perhaps, or it feels innovative. I don't know. If anybody wants to jump in, please feel free.
I'll take a stab at it. So, you know, I would say that like there's something you could say about this. Like it's on the one hand, it's kind of like the colonial gaze. It's kind of like the heart of darkness idea, being in this like very exotic, scary place. It's like a lower cultural level, right? It's kind of like that really is, I feel like is what it's saying, right? That simply is what it's saying. This is like a lawless place. It'd be much safer in the United States. We're like, which, like, okay, maybe overall compared to like parts of northern Mexico, compared to like parts of the southern United States, maybe, but like it just seems like it's way too much of like a binary, and it comes across as a bit, again, almost kind of colonial. But I will say that, like, by colonial, I don't mean that like it's saying that we have to colonize or whatever, but it has this kind of an element of the inscrutable other. Like what are they thinking about? What's going on with them? Like, and I'm saying that in a sarcastic way, but I don't mean to like make fun of that, because honestly, that's like how I think when you're in this position of being like a sort of like a policeman on the borderland, this is the kind of perspective that you end up having. And I think it's like something we see in a lot of like literature, and a lot of movies, for better or worse. I think it's like fair to kind of thematize as a way of seeing your environment. I think you have to kind of recognize it for what it is. I hope that the audience recognizes it for what it is, that we can have a different perspective. And here's where it gets a little bit, to me, where it gets almost a little bit worse, is they try to kind of lampshade it by having Silvio, the policeman, who is like our like, see, but the other side of it is they have families too. It's like, obviously he's going to be like just a random casualty of this, like, of this war and of this conflict that ultimately is, done by the CIA, right? It's the CIA has instigated this. But it seems like it's kind of weird to then kind of try to have it both ways, to try to have it be kind of like this inability to understand this culture and kind of the fear of it. It's sort of like, obviously it's good maybe they try to. I guess I'd prefer that they would try to. But if they're going to try to and show the other side, and just the fact that like these are just human beings with dynamics, like there's crime here too in the United States. It's like people kind of make do with it. Obviously it's crazy when it happens, and like, obviously, so they do try to do that, especially at the very end. But I don't know, I thought it was a little bit kind of a little too late, and it felt like it was because it had a kind of a guilty conscience about kind of thrilling you with this kind of colonial gaze. So I don't know. I guess how would I have done it differently? I don't know. I can't say I do know, but that was kind of my feeling.
I agree. I 100% agree, Connor, with a lot of what you said. And actually, the Silvio, I guess you'd call it a storyline, is probably my least favorite aspect of the film, aside from the aforementioned John Bernthal scene, which just felt very out of place. But like I think for the reasons you said, on a more superficial narrative level, I just find it unsatisfying that we're getting these scenes with this guy, and then just as a setup to him dying, just so when he dies, it's like emotionally, oh, but he has a kid, like it's like it was completely redundant. I think his death and that scene with Benicio del Toro at the end would still have been effective if he just says he has the kid, rather than having to have multiple scenes of just him at home eating breakfast, all this. But yeah, I think too, it is indicative of kind of a guilty conscience, or sort of an attempt like to sort of, well, we need a Mexican character in this film. We need a Mexican character that's kind of a POV character that we can get at least a little of. But it's such a half measure. I feel like if you're doing that, you got to go all the way with it or not at all, and have a movie that truly shows, like, has like, 50-50 screen time or something, because otherwise it just feels, superfluous, because it's so different than the rest of the movie that every time we see him, we're kind of wondering, okay, what's going on here? What's his role going to be? What's this kind of building to? When we see that he's one of the corrupt state police, I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But then he just dies, and I don't know. I don't like that aspect. And I guess you could file it under a similar thing with Emily Blunt. It falls into the same category of kind of subverting your expectations, and like, sometimes these things end abruptly. It doesn't comply with kind of our, the traditional narrative structures we would like. So I think it's probably justifiable on that level. But I do have kind of a distaste for that storyline for some of the reasons you kind of alluded to. But there is a scene I was thinking of as you were talking, kind of towards the middle of the movie. This is right after, the torture scene with Benicio del Toro and Guillermo. And Emily Blunt's walking outside and she's all rattled and she goes to smoke a cigarette. And this military guy, who I don't think has any other lines in the movie or has any other role, he calls her up to the roof and says, "Let me show you something." And he says, "You want to see some fireworks?" And he directs her binoculars at, over the border in Juarez, and she sees an explosion and she sees gunshots. And he's basically saying, like, pretty cool, right? It's like the scene in Titanic where the scientist is showing a simulation of the boat blowing up and saying, pretty cool, right? It's almost like, this is what you came here to see. That guy is Denis Villeneuve and Taylor Sheridan, who I think do have sort of this fetish for violence, and not just the violence, but the idea of the brutality, the idea that there's this place of, like, there's this war zone, there's this world where wolves are wolves and men are men, and where the real shit is going down. And, like, there is sort of an almost like pornographic aspect to it, and just like, but I think that scene, and I don't know how self-aware that scene is. I don't know if that's sort of a meta statement or not, but even if it is, I don't know how successful it is, because I think it embodies sort of the more problematic aspects of the movie.
Tony, isn't that you though? Like, going back to your comment, aren't you a fan of the ultra-violent, like, brutalist media that's kind of lays everything?
Sure, absolutely. No, okay. I love stuff that pushes the boundary, and that's me too. Sure. That's probably the reason I like this movie so much, on right. Some level, right? I mean, I do respond to that. I do like the sense of, like, stuff that might come across as like try hard or over the top to some people. I'm just like, that's great. Give me more of it. There are scenes in this movie where I do think it tries a little bit too hard to rub your nose in the brutality, tries to frighten you with the villains so often. Like, one particular moment that I thought was just too much is when she, sees the dismembered bodies when she goes in Juarez for the first time. It just feels like a little bit too much. But I guess Kirk, I'm ambivalent, because, aesthetically I really like this movie, and I still would defend the movie on thematic grounds in certain respects. But I don't know that you can separate out these, more problematic elements as well, because I too agree. Like, I don't know that a movie that doesn't have these elements would be a fundamentally different movie. Imagine the hypothetical movie I alluded to where we see 50-50 on both sides of the border, and Silvio's made into like a main character, right? That's a fundamentally different movie, right? That wouldn't be Sicario anymore. It might be a good movie in its own right, but it wouldn't be the same. So I guess I'm ambivalent on some of these issues.
Here's a curious problem with the thematic content that brings me back to what Connor was saying at the beginning in his note, and his mention of the kind of colonial framework of the movie. Is there's something interesting about and frustrating about Benicio del Toro's Alejandro's character's connection to the Medellin cartel, which I don't know if anyone caught this, but there's a weird frustration with how everything that's not in Mexico is actually based on historical reality. The Medellin cartel is a real cartel, and its connection most famously to Pablo Escobar that still runs. Whereas in Mexico, we're in a land of fantasy, and we're inventing a kind of Sonoran cartel for the sake of the film. And one of the frustrating things, and why it's so frustrating to me, is because there's this moment in the movie, I don't remember who says it, but someone says, when President Taft visited Mexico to Ciudad Juarez, he took 4,000 men with him, and an assassin broke through. You think he felt safe? You guys remember this scene? It's this kind of like moment where we're supposed to like think that the legacy of Mexico is always violent and it's never going to change. There's something frustrating about this idea that things will never change, first of all. The second part is the movie's kind of emphasized that the American West, the violent legacy, has been pushed down south to the border. But the story is kind of fabricated for the sake of the film. One thing is Taft did go down there. He didn't bring 4,000 men with him. It was like overall 4,000 men between two diplomatic parties. The assassin didn't run after him. The assassin was caught a long time before and may have been invented by an American public. Now, I'm not saying that this movie has to totally honor a historical fact or a historical anecdote, but the way the film wants us to set up is to believe in kind of a fake history this whole time for the movie to overall thematically make sense. One country is always violent, always a whirlpool of disaster and a legacy of it, whereas another country like Colombia could then just be ushered in because one guy's badass enough because America supports him to then take down a whole system of family, which is kind of interesting to me and frustrating, to go back to what Connor was saying at the very beginning. And I don't quite buy it when we start thinking about everything as a kind of symbolic, thematic piece, if that makes sense.
I buy it thematically. I just don't buy it politically. If I saw this movie and I was from like Yugoslavia, you know what I mean? Like, I had just this movie to go by what I knew about these two countries. I mean, it's pretty badass. I don't know. I think I might start sounding like, this might start sounding like Body of Lies podcast here, but I think at least on this movie, I have a little more of a kind of critical consensus to back me up, but badass is the wrong word. I think, it evokes emotion, right? I think that's what it does well. I think it's hard to watch this movie and not feel frustrated or confused or, guilty. I think it does provoke a reaction. That's what good films try to do. I think by the end, we are all kind of Emily Blunt looking down the barrel of this, report that we have to sign. And then that's kind of like turning the camera back on us. What do we think about what we just saw? Do we agree? Do we agree that the ends justify the means? Do we agree with the depiction of who's at fault? Where this violence stems from, right? That the cartel leader does say, like, who do you think we learned it from? Which I thought was a nice line. We needed more of that, to be honest. But, I thought that was a very kind of poignant moment in my opinion. That final dinner, that was riveting, really. But not to get off track here. And then she, she has a moment to kind of collect herself and regain her sense of moral superiority from the balcony by pointing the gun at Benicio del Toro, but not killing him. So like she's able to sleep at night, right? Because she did quote unquote the right thing, and he's the scoundrel. But ultimately, it's a little more nuanced. It's a little more murky, and I guess your feeling for the film or towards the film will vary based upon whether or not you think it was created with a sense of understanding of what the true politics are in the scenario, and whether or not this was created to challenge those or to reinforce them. I think it probably did more to reinforce than to challenge, to be honest. But perhaps that's a different movie. I don't know. It's hard to say. These films don't exist in the vacuum, right? But anyways, let's move on to the voting here. Try to move on to deciding whether or not this gets in. I'm pretty confident that we know the answer to that, but who knows? Perhaps somebody will be a wild card, a wolf in a sea of sheep. So let's go with the first sheep. That would be Connor. You're a sheep. Just kidding. Your votes are appreciated either way.
I'm going to bare my teeth, Kirk, because you said that. Sure, I am the wolf after all. No, I have a couple questions actually first before I vote. Okay, first, anyone can answer this. This is not trivia. This is just things I actually want to know. So the Medellin cartel actually still exists and is operative. Okay. And is Alejandro, is he like working for them currently? Like he actually is being sent by the Medellin cartel?
Well, first, just quick, the Medellin cartel supposedly fell apart in 92, 93. Yeah. It's not quite as simple as like, oh, they have a website with an org, and like we know it, but it's pretty much believed that things got picked up over the last 25 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a power vacuum, right? Somebody occupied it. I mean, these guerrilla groups and all these paramilitary
and former
rogues.
Escobar, generals and soldiers. So like there is still a fight for who controls the Medellin cartel. It's not quite as organized as it used to be.
Right.
Yeah.
I just couldn't tell like whether it was like this was just in the past. And I didn't realize when they say Medellin that that's like his name because they know him from working from the cartel, not like that like they're just saying, "Oh, you work for the Medellin cartel." Like everyone knows like, okay, you know.
No, I think he has a certain reputation for being brutal.
Okay. So basically, yeah, it was just like it's unclear to me. And it's like by killing the boss, kind of as part of his revenge quest, they're going to continue the war on drugs, and they're going to eliminate the cartels that way, so that only the CIA-backed, Medellin cartel will still exist. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so basically, as for the movie overall, again, that's still like to me that central twist. Of course, like what is interesting there is, of course, that that is in the U.S. We've been talking a lot about how like, okay, but no, it's like it's portrays Mexico in this way, but of course, but you can always say, but like the U.S. was doing it all along, which is Anthony I think hinted is like can also be kind of like it can be a little bit kind of giving America too much credit that they're like all powerful, they can pull the strings behind everything, but of course it's trying to point out something real, which is that like the United States is implicated in this dynamic, like they exist as a pair. Like these things don't happen just in a vacuum. You couldn't necessarily have this kind of cartel power in Mexico if the U.S. didn't have certain policies and behave a certain way and occupy a certain position on the continent and stuff like that. So it's like, but I still think just as we're just saying as we're recounting this, it's like it somehow feels just kind of like pro forma. Like it just feels like it's not about that. I don't see like how that really like comes through in the movie. Anyway, so I guess I'll just vote. I'll say it's a no for me again. Like I love the tone. I love the tone at the beginning. Again, I think one thing they say about Denis Villeneuve and certainly about Taylor Sheridan, Taylor Sheridan. For me, my rule is no exposition, right? And he's known for not having exposition. But this movie is full of exposition at the end. Literally, Josh Brolin just let me explain to you the backstory of this guy. Of course, like sometimes we need exposition and there's a purpose to it. But it's like, to me, like then we lost the plot of it being an exposition-free, suspenseful, sort of thing. So that's still my take. It movie kind of has two halves. I think they could have done it better, the second half. I'm going to say it's a no. It's a soft no. Still worth a watch. I'm glad I watched it. Interesting, too, to think about how it fit into its time. And how like it definitely felt like a breath of fresh air at the time. And I remember that. And that was kind of why there was this hype around it. But anyway.
All right. Thank you, Connor. Let's go to Tony now.
Yeah, I mean, for everything I said, and I do believe this movie is, it has sort of issues, it has limitations, but I am still going to go yes. I still really like and appreciate this movie. I think that it's a triumph of tone, it's a triumph of visuals. I think it does occupy, still like a pretty unique place. I can't think of another movie that does exactly what this movie does, that scratches the exact itch that this movie does. I think it's, a worthy kind of representative of Denis Villeneuve in general, just because he's such a prominent kind of leading filmmaker these days. And I think that this movie is a great kind of chapter in his filmography that showed a lot of kind of growth. And again, for all the limitations of the script, I think the movie does grapple with some kind of interesting ideas about war and about conflict and power vacuums and the cycle of violence and all these things. And while the movie doesn't really give us any kind of a solution, any kind of a way out, it has just kind of this nihilistic feeling. I also feel like it's not the movie's job to solve these problems. And of course, there are all these, sort of colonialist problematic aspects we've alluded to here. But I still really love this movie. I think it's really cool. And I think that if you are someone who likes thrillers that have a little bit of a darker edge, or who are interested in kind of, boundary pushing, pulse pounding kind of stuff, this is an absolute essential it's essential in the Tony canon. So got to give it a yes.
All right, we're 1-1 heading to the final vote. Anthony, please let us know whether this will be in the 706 or in the trash.
It's exciting. I feel like I haven't had the power in a while, but I don't know, and I agree with so many of Connor's points in the way he phrased them. I don't know if the few exciting set pieces, the style and the tone overpower, outweigh the limitations of the themes it raises, the thematic concerns it addresses. So I gotta say is like I think Connor actually made a more convincing case for me to go no with this film. I could see what Tony gravitated towards, and I admire it. But this is a soft no, I think, for me.
All right, fair enough. All we ask for on the 706 is some good discussion, some good banter, and I think we accomplished that this time around. So I do appreciate all your opinions. One final thought on Emily Blunt's character. I think the idea that her attractiveness kind of correlates with her, digging deep into these issues that are very hard hitting, I think is kind of a common trope, right? She should remember her femininity, and perhaps that was a little bit lazy on Taylor Sheridan's part here as well. Or maybe it's actually just shows Daniel Kaluuya's character's kind of domineering presence. Who knows? Anyways, let's move on to the nomination phase. Here we are going to or I am going to choose which movie we'll watch next. My three co-hosts will each nominate a film. The person who has hosted an episode least recently will go, and I want to say that will be Tony Jr. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. It is Tony Jr.
Okay, there we go. So Tony will decide the order of the nominations, and remember, folks, the Kirk rule is still in effect. If somebody nominates a film, well, once they nominate a film, that given decade is now crossed off the list, so you'll have to mix it up. And Tony, what is going to be the order for today?
All right, I'll go last because I have a film in mind, and I want to see if the decade gets taken. Just keep me on I like being on my toes here. Sometimes that works out best. We'll see. I'll have Connor go first.
All right, Connor, take it away.
Getting butterflies here. I just don't know if I have the right stuff to get through this time. Okay, I'm going to go with, I believe it's 1961, Billy Wilder's 1, 2, 3. A deep cut from legendary German-American Hollywood director, actually Austrian-American Hollywood director Billy Wilder. This is a film that takes place in Germany, in Berlin, actually, not at the fall of the wall, but at the building of the wall. In fact, the wall went up, the wall was built during the filming of the movie. It's sort of a Cold War comedy about a Coca-Cola executive who is tasked with looking after like the boss's daughter while she's on vacation in Berlin. He's like the regional head of Coca-Cola sales in Europe. And she absconds over the wall and falls in love with a communist. And it's sort of like a screwball comedy in the Billy Wilder style. But it is a hilarious take on kind of the politics of the time. It's very quaint, obviously. It's kind of weird to hear these, the Cold War treated at the very instant it's going on in this kind of very lighthearted way. When literally it was, there's threat of nuclear war. When the wall went up, it was almost a complete, fiasco. Obviously it's hard to imagine, but I think it's very interesting to look back on, especially in our modern day. Communism, it's very hot right now. And capitalism and all that. It feels very fresh. And I think we'll all enjoy it.
All right, thanks, Connor. So that means Anthony's next. Anthony, is your movie 4, 5, 6?
I gotta say that was the most Connor sounding movie I've ever heard. It was like AI generated for him. Okay, Kirk. I'm gonna nominate something from 1985. I have a feeling you might have seen it, or at least hopefully you might have seen it. But I'm doing it because it's not only a film I love, but it's because today, as we're recording on July 31st, 2023, its lead star has actually passed away. And it's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, starring Paul Rubens. And Pee-wee's Big Adventure, if you haven't seen it, is a dark family comedy directed by Tim Burton in his first film debut, written by the legendary Phil Hartman of SNL fame and later The Simpsons, and of course, tragically, what happened to him. But what we have is a kind of amazing farce of the classic film Bicycle Thieves. But what it does to achieve this kind of parody is deliver what may be one of the greatest comedies about the American West, specifically Texas and Tejano culture, ever delivered on screen. It is hilarious. It's funny. It's dark. It has something for everybody. And I'm going to say it's worth a shot. Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
All right. Didn't we already have a Blank's Big Adventure? If I remember, or was that?
And it was so good, we said we're not doing any more of these. This occupies the Big Adventure slot in our canon.
Yeah. For folks who are unfamiliar, we did watch a Barney film. I can tell you, to show you how much we've grown, right? You know, we've really elevated our game here. So Tony, go ahead.
Well, I would say we've actually regressed. Those were the golden years. That's our best episode, and it's gone downhill ever since. But I'm going to try and bring it back. So Connor and Anthony both pitched farces, silly, wacky romps. So I'm going to pick the most farcical movie of all time, probably, and that's Drive from 2011 by Nicholas Winding Refn. A wacky goof 'em up about a stuntman played by the one and only Ryan Ken Gosling, in the role that, maybe not the role that put him on the map, but certainly the role that made him the literally me meme, every high school boy buys the Scorpion jacket, that cult, that moment, that little cultural moment. But this is a movie I saw in the theater. My 18th birthday, I went and saw this movie in the theater.
No, Tony. It would have been your 9th birthday. Remember, you were born in 2002.
Well, I had to lie to sneak into the theater, so I didn't want people to think I didn't want people to know. Thanks for blowing my cover, wise guy. But yeah, this movie is a movie I saw in the theater, and I bought the Blu-ray when it came out, and when it came out, I was really jazzed on it, but I haven't really watched it since. But I think it's a movie that's really ripe to be revisited, because it was such a little cult classic. It had such a specific little moment in the culture. It really made an impact on like a certain group of people that saw it and got really hyped on it. And I just think it's been over 10 years. I think we gotta go back to it, because this is a movie that I could really see going kind of either way. Like, I'm not pitching it as like, oh, this is an absolute masterpiece, it needs to be in the 706. I'm pitching it more as like, I want to rewatch this movie and talk about it. And I think that it's the time is ripe. I think we got to do an episode on it sooner or later.
Huh. So let's see here. This is interesting, if nothing else. I don't know that I'm leaning one way in particular. What I will ask is, included in your rebuttals, why you think this film would be, worthy of induction into our very prestigious canon. Perhaps that may be something we can look at. I know we do that already, but maybe what I'm trying to convey is that for this episode, I think I'm going to be a little less selfish and just choose the movie I want to watch the most and think a little bit more about our canon. Maybe, like I said, Tony, we're elevating here. I'm becoming more evolved, more refined. Go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, Kirk. Okay, I feel like my task, really, I think you're playing your cards close to your chest. I would say really what I have to fight is Drive right now, which I have not seen, but come on, it's like the so predictable movie, bro, toxic take. Let's not do it. Let's do something a little bit more refined, going back to the 1960s. I think our mandate as the 706 is to bring, great film, historical film, sort of expand our audience's minds with new experiences. This is a black and white, screwball comedy. It's kind of written, it was based on a play. It sort of has a play kind of energy, but in a way that's just, the writing is so incredible. I think for anyone who hasn't experienced something like this, it's really kind of like a unique pleasure that will not only be very fun to watch, that'll have interesting parallels to today, but also We'll just give you an insight into a different kind of filmmaking that you don't necessarily get to see every time you go or open Netflix.
Okay. Fair enough. Who's next? Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by Connor's film. I've never seen it. And he makes a great case for it. I'll say I actually rewatched Drive during COVID, and I actually really liked it, and I thought it held up. I will say, like, as a movie itself, beyond the vibes, the soundtrack, and like the glorious look of it, I just, I'm sure we'll be able to, but I just don't find it that rich or deep of a conversation piece. But maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I need a third or another rewatch to get my juices going. And I'll say, in terms of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, it'd be so easy to write it off or to laugh it off as kind of a throwaway choice or throwaway nomination. But if you haven't seen it, it's not only Tim Burton's debut, but there's actually something really like kind of fascinating about it. A couple of fun facts. One, Josh Brolin's dad, James Brolin, is in the film. So there's a connection to Sicario that we must speak about. And two, there's something kind of zany, mad comicsy, and Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin about it in a kind of unique piece that's not really nostalgic, but really revels in kind of a parody of 80s Americana, while at the same time really kind of commenting on the sadness, the disaster, the kind of machismo of the American Southwest, while also kind of criticizing Hollywood and what it kind of does to our expectations of gender, romance, communism, to just throw that out there as well. But really does this all kind of lament the style of filmmaking. I don't really see it anymore. So I think there's something kind of more interesting than what may sound like there is on the surface.
Hey, it's been a while since someone threw out the no meat on the bones rebuttal, but Anthony just unleashed it on Tony. Tony, that's a tough blow. It's happened to me more than once. How do you respond?
I'm open to that take. I mean, like I said, I haven't seen it in a while. This is a movie I want to bring out and kind of dust off and in the cold light of day. It is a movie that is often dinged for being kind of all style, no substance. That's a critique that I sort of take umbrage with sometimes. I don't know that I think that distinction is kind of fallacious. I think that part of the joy of film is the aesthetics. Part of the joy of film is, if you can create an amazing vibe. And I mean, obviously we had a long conversation about like Spring Breakers and all the things that movie does. But that movie is also a triumph of atmosphere. And I think Drive is an absolute triumph of atmosphere as well. And we can dissect why that is. And we can dissect why did this movie resonate with the people that it did at the time that it did? Why did it come out at the time that I did? What is it being influenced by? How has it influenced movies going forward? I think there's a lot of angles we could kind of take it. And I find Nicholas Winding Refn a very kind of interesting, idiosyncratic figure in film because because after Drive, he became kind of a star and people really wanted a follow-up to Drive that he never really delivered. I mean, maybe a more interesting pitch would be something like Only God Forgives or something he did later. I don't know. But I think Drive is the one. I think Drive is the one we got to do. And I really do think that we could have a great discussion out of it. Is it the basic film choice? Perhaps. It's no American Psycho, I grant you. But I have seen Connor's film. He showed it to me. I can't take credit for discovering it on my own. It's a little bit of a truffle you had to dig out of the dirt there, but it is very entertaining. It's a very funny, fun little romp. Anthony sounds great. Anthony sounds like a very good kind of change of pace. Have we done a Tim Burton movie? I can't remember that we have, but I think this will be a good one to do. I have not seen it. But yeah, I think the biggest weakness for Drive is more that it's too similar to Sicario, similar era, similar kind of ultra violence, probably a huge overlap in the fan bases. So that's a point against it, I guess. But I do think it's a movie we should definitely do at some point.
All right. So, yeah, I'm not super thrilled, one way or another here. I feel like usually it's, some very violent film kind of that speaks to me or a film that tackles an issue I find intriguing. I don't know. Anthony, you alluded to some interesting topics, certainly with Pee-wee here, but I don't know. I don't want to do Drive. I actually remember not even liking it and really getting much out of it, though I can appreciate, its position and what it's meant for people, but have you heard the soundtrack kind of thing? It was definitely a vibes movie, and I do like vibes movies as I liked Spring Breakers. So maybe it's just kind of a sour memory. But so do we want to go to the 60s or the 80s? I'm just going to go with Anthony's here, if for no other reason than the fact that we're going to get the YouTube algorithm on our side when this episode comes out in 2025 and people are still Googling Pee Wee Herman death. No, we're going to do Pee Wee's Great Adventure. It sounds like a whimsical ride. I think we'll learn something along the way, and it's kind of outside of that zone of comfort, which is something that intrigues me. It's a movie I would never watch if it weren't for this podcast. So that in and of itself holds value. So let's hear your triumphant retort, Anthony.
Well, first of all, I got to say, is Kirk never usually goes to someone who went the previous episode. So this must have been a real sad case of choices for him to go with my film. But I'm excited. You guys will discover where the basement of the Alamo is, and you'll also learn that I'll have what she's having.